Yeah, I know that. But thank you for giving me the reason for my question.
All right, good morning, everyone. You are in the Trusted Execution Environment and Provisioning Working Group. If this is not the group that you want to be in, you're in the wrong room. I want to welcome you to the IETF 106. We will be going through a lot of items here, but the first thing I wanted to do was make the announcement. The reason why I'm sitting here by myself is because Dave will be taking a bigger contributing role, but I wanted to thank Dave for all of his contributions and allow Ben to make an announcement.
Well, first off, thanks, Dave. I know we're all looking forward to seeing more from you in the future. You're not going anywhere. But I also wanted to say thank you to Tiru Kanda, right? Yes,
Contribution.
I'm saying it right? For agreeing to take over from Dave as the co-chair. So everybody, please welcome Tiru, and we're looking forward to working with you in the future.
Welcome, Tiru.
But since I just dropped this on Tiru last night, I'm gonna let him stay in the audience and ramp up in a more reasonable time frame. So Nancy, thank you again for staying up there at the front.
Well, hopefully the group will be kind to me.
Yes, and I will help out as needed.
Great, thanks. All right, so with that, let's get to the orders of business. I don't think I'm going to read through the note well. Hopefully everybody is aware. Do we have any new attendees here? Show of hands? Good, so you are all well aware of the note well, so we can move on. With respect to the administrative tasks, I believe I have a couple of folks that help me volunteer. Tiru being one. Oh, Frank escaped. So sad. Can I have a second note taker, please? And the Etherpad link is in the slides. So it would be good if we could have a second one. I can't keep moving until I have a second volunteer. Thank you. Oh, Frank will be back. And if just, was that Mike? Yeah, just put your name on I started it, and just add your name there as the note taker. And I thank Rich Saltz for being our Jabber scribe. So with that logistics underway, let's get to the agenda bash. Slide. Gotta love Chrome. Maybe not. Okay. So with that, we had a very productive hackathon this week. And so Akira will be providing that report. And then Dave will spend the rest of the time going through the architecture. So now that Dave has stepped down as chair, you might have seen the announcement that to help expedite things, Dave is now also going to be a contributing editor for the architecture draft. So any objections or items to add to the agenda? Going once, going twice? Okay. What's that? I wasn't going to, because it's just for today. All right. So with that, Akira, you want to? We do have a few folks on the Meet Echo as well, so just let me know since I'm running this solo.
Hello? Yeah, just say that to wake me up. It's a hackathon report on Saturday, Sunday, and most of the first half of the slide is the same slide I used on Sunday report.
Yeah, this thing gets busted. Hold on. I got to do it again.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Try that.
Okay.
I did. I
Yeah,
pushed
yeah,
this
it's
one.
working.
This one. But sometimes-
So what we plan, it's in the slide. So we the main thing main active we did in the hackathon is testing implementation of ORTRP over HTTP, and Dave and Isobe-san brought the TAM, and Dave and I brought the Teep device. Didn't know what to say for the Teep device, so probably it's going to be Teep device from now on. And yeah, a little bit of a misspelling, but yeah, all the participants at the hackathon. And yes, so this is the table, and the UI uploading, able to uploading TA, trusted application on the TAM. And this is the ARM 64-bit. Actually, it's Cortex A53 8-core device with connecting with the PC to reboot and able to flash the bootloader. And Wireshark, debug, printf, debugging message, and etc. And yeah, it's the log saying hello IETF Teep when after able to install the TA on the Opti. So what we learned is, yes, filed issue with the HTTP 03 and Teep protocol draft, and came up with a lot of implementation action item for the future. Yes, my knowledge of the IETF in 2001, around 2001, is if anything is have UDP working, was okay to do something like RTP on top of it, and there was no operating system doesn't speak UDP that time. But now for the ORTRP hackathon, yeah, here is the future considering what we need, but so many things underneath must be already working to make the ORTRP Teep working. So that's something we learned at the hackathon. And something went well is preparation from the beginning of Saturday, without harming or disturbing or making the RETF network down. We were able to send so many misspelling or non-node terminated packets on the network, and nothing went wrong, only was able to debug it, and able to cross-check with the other implementation of a TAM from Isobe-sans and Dave. That was my device. So I never connected other than my fake TAM before. And the future consideration, what we need. So we need to select, if we're going to the hackathon in the future and more productive, to make it easier for the implementation. I only have 5 more minutes, so we need to have at least what kind of the hardware we use for the implementing, and at least starting to ORTRP and Teep on top of the existing stack. For we need JSON stack, HTTP stack, and crypto stack for TLS and JW and JWS is working, and we need CBAR too. And why I'm writing here is because on Saturday, almost at the end of the Saturday, I was to debug the ORTRP packet on HTTP. I end up debugging my packet of the HTTP header is not compliant, and JSON parser is not working, and so I end up debugging the underlayer than ORTRP and Teep activity. So this is my I have no preference. I just listed up what might need to be considered in Teep working group. So reference time machine, is it okay? Just use a PC. any hardware we would like to have other than the TAM, I really don't know. And the reference Teep device, Teep device in the many different area, it's called IoT device or edge device or whatever it is from your background. And for the ARM, probably Opti usable device is probably the easiest, but I don't know if Raspberry Pi is the right one or anything. And Intel device, SGX usable device, yes. And it would be nice if there's something other than laptop PC. And RISC-V is, there's only one board exists at the moment, and that's already have a PMP station, which is similar to ARM processor, but different way of implementing. And Hannes, do you have a question?
Yeah, I think that's a good question also in light of the hackathon in February. I looked at some of the devices, and maybe Dave will have some further recommendations, but a device that I recently looked at, which I thought was really cool that we could make use of for future events and people who want to play around with the stuff is a device recently released by ST Microelectronics called STM32MP1. I can send a link to the list, and I looked at the trust zone implementation, which also comes with Opti, and it also has an M-class processor on the device, so it's really looks like a rock solid, nice device to play with.
Thank you. Is that a Cortex A? Oh, okay.
Dave Taylor. Since Hannes basically asked me to make some recommendation, the other device that we use for testing that I would recommend, which has probably more security features than the Raspberry Pi 3, is also a Cortex A53. And so NXP, there's a board from Scalus, it's called the Great Board, that is what is used in a commercial product called the Trust Box from Scalus, and that's the one that got like the CES Cybersecurity Innovation Award this last year. And so that's another one that actually has a box, that's a industrial box that goes around it, but you can just use the Great Board instead of the Raspberry Pi 3. So that'd be another piece of hardware that might be useful.
Thank you. And another thing is software stack. TAM side. On the TAM side, it's pretty much as a regular PC laptop, not laptop, but server setup. So Apache, Node.js, and crypto, OpenSSL, or some variant, but probably it's okay. And I'm not sure what Seaboard parser will be recommended. We might need to come up with it. And the Teep device, yes, the Teep device it's supposed to be limited hardware capability. Easiest way is to do it is use a PC even on a Teep device. But other than that, we need to think about rootfs, build root, Yakuza OE or OpenWRT. Otherwise, putting on the HTTP stack, JSON stack, and crypto stack will be depend on the rootfs. And there's so many selection on the crypto library: OpenSSL, LibreSSL, Boring SSL, EmbedTLS, WolfSS, and S2N. And OpenSSL variant, it tends to be very large for the Teep device, so probably we need think about something smaller stack. And we also need a Seaboard parser. We need somebody to do the Seaboard parser here. And I'm not sure this is the scope of the Teep working group, but something came up during the hackathon is, yes, if it might having a test bed on the internet. So have a TAM and everybody able to poke on the TAM with your Teep device, then you could do the hackathon preparation before you coming at the table. And the IDE development. So the TE, programming and the TE, and the previous slide, I was using printf. So printf debugging is, at the moment, is the most used way on the trusted application debugging, which is not that productive. And yes, Open Enclave is IDE. development environment. And yes, I haven't tried it on my Opti device. So, and in the future, should we have a GitHub for the hosting reference implementation? Then the person who doesn't have just try out or wants to deep dive the RFC draft, then able to see the implementation. And also the Teep requires the hardware support. So TAM side, what kind of hardware we might good to have, or on Teep device side, what else we might good to have is something.
So those are good questions, Akira. I would encourage you to post them on the Teep mail group.
Mail group?
So
okay.
we already have for the documents at GitHub, a Teep organization. So if people are willing to volunteer and put code there, we can certainly open up a repository there. Yeah.
And yes, this is my note for my Teep device. I had more detailed technical description, but yes, if you bring something, you learn a lot. So everybody encouraged to participate in Teep hackathon. And yes, that's it.
Thank you. And tomorrow, Hannes will speaking for a couple minutes on another planned hackathon coming up in February. So, okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions for Akira? No? Okay. Thank you. Dave, you are up. I got to do this magic. Try the flicker. I might have to do it again.
Yeah, looks good.
It works.
Okay, so we're going to spend some time going through the issues filed against the architecture document. I'm going to go through almost everything. There's a couple issues that I think are just editorial that don't need discussion, but almost everything I'm going to cover here. All right, so I've got a slide or two on every issue that is worth discussing, and so actually back up for a second. The goal is to try to have the editors have an idea of what the working group wants the resolution to an issue to be, such that if the text isn't there, we at least know what the intent is, and we can go and author that in the next rev, such that the next rev of the document should ideally cover some answer to every issue, which hopefully reflects working group consensus, so that we can then verify whether we got it right. Okay, so I want to actually have enough information for the editors to know what to do with each issue. Some things we actually have proposed text for, a lot of them we don't. And so I'll ask the questions and get the opinion of the working group so that we know what to do.
There. Thanks.
Okay. All right. So the first one was, I think you can see for each of these, they have the GitHub issue number. You can see this one is issue number 69. Separately, it was also part of issue number 70. Jürgen sent a review to the list that included a bunch of things from editorial, nits all the way up to questions. And so some of those are covered in other slides. You see number 70 a number of times in these. Okay. So 69 is the one that pulls out specifically this question. Should the architecture document use normative language? Current status is that the draft, by the way, is intended status of informational, but it does use terms from RFC 2119. Okay. So we can first confirm, should it be informational or standardized track, right? My understanding from what the chairs believed that it should be informational.
Correct.
I think our charter milestone actually says that.
Says it's informational.
Okay? And
yes.
so the answer there is it should be informational, but the charter doesn't actually say whether we need to use 2119 language or not. And currently the architecture document does include some terms in various places. And I'll show you some examples on the next slide. And so if it should use any of those, then should the audience be implementers? In other words, those are conformance things that an implementer writes code that conforms to a particular must, should, or may. Or is it for spec writers like the authors of the Teep protocol spec? Okay. Or if spec writers, which specs? And so a proposal for your feedback is that it stays informational, and we could remove the 2119 terms. whether you like that proposal or not. So let's look at some examples. This is not the complete list, but the point is the spec right now includes some uses of language that is directed at spec writers. And so you can see 3 examples there talking about what goes in, and it says OTRP protocol, right? You'd imagine it, the Teep protocol. Here's what that other protocol document shall do, okay? So these are examples of normative language. And so we could either keep this language or we could just not use 2119 language, since you could say the same thing in English text. And there's also other statements that are directed at implementers, like the examples on the bottom, okay? So for example, the TAM should use a CRL or whatever to validate certificates, that type of statement, okay, is in the architecture document right now, okay? Such statements could be moved to the protocol document if we think there needs to be normative text that's there, and those, in theory, could move to, say, the Teep protocol spec, okay? So the question here is, what do we want the architecture document to be? Should it have any of these uses, or should all of these be removed in terms of 2119 language and just have informative text, okay? You can see right now, as an editor, I would propose to remove those terms and just use English text, but if there are people in the working group that would object to that or think that those need to stay there, then this is your time to say that.
So my suggestion is to put this on the email list just to confirm, right?
Yeah, we can do that for all of these, but yeah. Okay. So here, my proposal is we remove the 2119 language from the document and use English text. But Hannes?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think those are, I don't know what the history is, why we got that in there, but it feels a little bit off for an architecture document, in my opinion. So I think there's no harm in changing it to lowercase and then actually revisiting some of the details, because they may as well better fit into the protocol document, to be honest.
Some of the statements, as you will see, actually are in sections that might be removed due to a later issue, because the architecture document was written prior to the time where the Teep working group decided to take a dependency on suit for manifest stuff and on RATs for attestation stuff. You can see some of these normative statements are in attestation stuff that might actually not belong in the document anymore, depending. So that's a later issue I'll get to, okay? So don't pay too much attention to the actual literal examples on here, but there's a lot more than just these 5 on the screen right now. Okay. All right. So hearing no objections to that proposal, I'm going to go on, and we'll, again, send stuff to the list in case there's objections on the list. Okay. Now we get into some terminology ones, and most of the terminology ones I left on the editorial stuff, but the first 2 I think are really about scoping, and so I call these out. This is a slightly easier one. There's 3 issues about terminology about the stuff that's outside the TEE. And the problem was, as a number of issues got filed, is that the same thing had multiple terms for it in different places in the document. Things like some places it was called an untrusted application, and other places it was a client application, but they both meant the same thing. Or what you call the operating system in the rich execution environment, a bunch of different terms that all meant the same thing. Okay, and so here you can see in there's a pull request that I didn't merge because I wasn't a chair before, but I submitted the pull request. Sorry, because I was not a document editor before. Now that I'm a document editor, I am free to merge them. But the Teep process is that editors merge and chairs close the GitHub issues, okay? And so now that I'm an editor and not a chair, that means I can now merge but not close the issues, where before I could close the issues but not merge, okay? So that's how it works in Teep, okay? The term between client application and untrusted application, in the pull request, I chose untrusted application, which avoids confusion with cases where you have server applications. Like I have an HTTP server or something else as a server for pick your favorite protocol. And the term client could be confusing because it's the server side of some protocol, right? So untrusted application was unambiguous. And so there you can see, depending on the context, in some cases, rich execution environment makes sense. In other cases, the filer, I don't remember who filed this one, suggested commodity operating system. And so I took that in one of the cases because where it was talking about that. Okay. All right. I'm going to go on since that one is this is the one that's actually closer to a scoping question. What's the definition of a TEE? Okay, because we provision TEEs in this working group, right? This is the TE provisioning working group. We provision TEEs. So what's a TEE? So previously, what you have in the document is that quote, an execution environment that runs alongside of but is isolated from an REE. The filer picked on the word isolated because the filer, and I don't remember who filed it, said, well, maybe isolated meant to them that they couldn't communicate between each other, but here they can. So they suggested maybe separated. And then there's a bunch of other discussions in issue number 68. And so an example is, can you have TEs that don't have any rich execution environment on the same device, right? Hannes mentioned an ST micro, for example, an MCU class thing. Can you have the entire thing be a TE and still call it a TEE, okay? So that's what I have on the next slide here. So feel free to get up to the mic, but wait till I get to the next slide. So I tried to generate a pull request for how I might try to resolve this, although this one overlaps with, so here's pull request 71. So 71 had my definition pulled from other places, which you may agree or disagree with, but it was on, say, our BOF charter discussion slides at one point, and so it's not new to the working group, which is anything that provides hardware enforcement that these two properties are true, right? Only prevents unauthorized code from executing. I'm just rephrasing what's on the slide here, and that it prevents tampering by stuff that's outside, right? So that's one definition that's different from the definition up there. So we could adopt this, okay? And so the scoping questions are, does a TE necessarily have to have an REE on the same device or not? Okay, and if it's not, do you call that not a TE? I would be inclined to say, yes, you could have a TE that does not have an REE on the same device. There was some discussion in the issue about referencing a trusted OS, and I think, Hannes, you had a comment or something about that in the issue. And so some TEs have a trusted OS, like TrustZone would, like Opti is an example of a trusted OS. Some, like SGX, do not have a trusted OS. So as long as you believe that SGX is a TE, then it does not have to have a trusted OS. Well, even in my definition on the previous one, you saw hardware enforcement. So the scoping question is, well, what if you don't have hardware enforcement? What if you just have enforcement by, say, a hypervisor? Do you call that a TE? Can you use the Teep protocol to provision something which isn't hardware-backed, it's only, say, hypervisor-backed? Well, what's the scope of the architecture, right? So this is actually a more central question, right? And so I went back to the Teep charter to say, how does the Teep charter define it, right? And so I quoted the key parts of the Teep charter for your information. Here it calls a TEE a secure area of a processor, which, well, that definition kind of implies hardware, but is that what we want? Talks about isolated execution and integrity and confidentiality assets. So that kind of overlaps with the definition on the previous slide. And then it talks about, in general terms, an execution space that provides a higher level of security than a rich operating system and more functionality than secure elements. Those are kind of the definitional thoughts. And there's some examples. And none of those actually specifically answer the question of whether hardware-based stuff is inherent to the definition of a TEE, other than maybe the secure area of a processor could. And so the question is, when we want the architecture document, do we want to constrain the architecture to explicitly call out that you must have, the TE must be backed by hardware, or do we want a softer definition?
This is Hannes.
Open questions now.
So I think I raised the issue because obviously we want to be inclusive in the definition, and we don't want to be, we can have examples in there for some of the popular things, but I thought it would be important specifically for the types of attacks we want to make the reader aware of. And specifically, like the definition, the main definition already includes sort of the distinction between this one, an execution environment that runs alongside but is isolated from the RE. So did you at least have a distinction between sort of the normal world where a regular operating system runs and the DE part? So you have that so that the normal world obviously can't access the DE side memory. Of course, there are differences that because some of the DEs don't provide or extend the protection all the way to peripherals, but only focus on memory. Would be a distinction between TrustZone and Intel SGX. However, I also think it's important to highlight that we specifically with the dynamic uploading, installation, and management of trusted applications, we also want to make sure that the DAs themselves are isolated from each other, and that the DAs are not able to access memory data that is essentially running at the higher privilege level, like if in trust zone case it can't access the operating system underneath. So there's additional protection capabilities there. And I think the only way to get those protection capabilities is through some hardware enforcement. And I consider hypervisor also a hardware enforcement technique, because there are ultimately hardware mechanisms. And that's where I think the charter definition falls a little bit short. It talks about the processor, and specifically in the DE in the ARM trust zone context, it's not enough to just look at the single processor. You actually have to think of it as a system concept, a cooperation between software and hardware that extends to the whole thing, because as you make memory access, you need to be aware that there's a bus and there are different peripherals on that bus, and if other peripherals like DMA controller can access the memory regions, they may just bypass all these things if you're not super careful. So I maybe that goes a little bit too far for this type of document, but I think there's also for the readers who may not be so familiar with all the different fine nuances of the different DEs, they probably should be aware of what's going on.
So clarifying question. So first of all, for anybody that comes to the mic, if you can say whether you like any of these definitions that I've shown, or if you like none of the above or something else, but you've made a specific point about isolation between TAs. Do you believe that that is part of the definition of a TEE, such that something that doesn't do that is not a TEE, or do you think that's just a property that some have? So, for example, if I have a secure element that supports one security domain and I can put any number of TAs in it, would you call it not a TEE? Because it meets the two properties at the bottom, okay? And so that's my definitional question. So up in the top here, those different properties, isolation between two TAs running in the same environment. Do you consider that to be a definition of a TE, or just a property that some have and some don't, like an OS?
Yeah, I just want to sort of, and maybe we need to talk about this aspect a little bit more in the security consideration section, is by the fact that we provide some dynamic nature with the work we are doing with this dynamic provisioning, we are suddenly also to a certain extent creating new attack possibilities that didn't exist previously, where everything was sort of nailed down and static in terms of what code is running on the secure side. And so I think we have to take that into account. I don't think existing definitions focus too much on the isolation between TAs, actually. While I believe if you want to go as far as saying that there are multiple parties on the or multiple authors of software now pushing code into the DE and in form of trusted applications, that there needs to be some isolation mechanism, whether that's provided by the operating system on the RE side, or whether some other techniques like in SGX. That's I think that's a secondary aspect, but I think it's worth highlighting that in for someone who wants to use such a system.
Okay. So what I heard you say, I'm going to try to summarize that in one phrase, because that was a long elaboration. The bottom line that I heard was you think it should be elaborated on in the security consideration section as opposed to the definition of a TE. Okay.
Lawrence Lundblade. Let me ask I'm not a hardcore Teep person, but let me ask Teep is a protocol, right?
It is now.
It's what you're doing, is defining a protocol.
Previously, we had an OTRP protocol. We now have a Teep protocol. We didn't before.
So it seemed to me that you're defining a protocol. You're not trying to make security guarantees or describe a security architecture for somebody implementing an operating system in some place like a TEE or something like that.
That is correct. The topic here is you can think of this part of the architecture document that's defining a TE as being almost like an applicability statement for the protocol.
Yes, and that's what it should be, is an applicability statement that guides what you do.
Right. So it says it's applicable to TEEs, and so what's a TEE is basically saying what the applicability scope is.
Yeah, so, I mean, I don't think I like any of your definitions because they're starting to try to, they're saying there's something magic or special about the security of what you're doing, and I don't think that this protocol really depends on any of that. I would imagine not. So I don't think it matters that
It does depend on the properties down below, I would argue.
So there's elements in the protocol that depends on those things.
As an individual, that is my interpretation of the
Okay.
protocol, yes.
Okay.
I don't know if Hannes has...
Okay, so
I disagree.
I don't know. I mean, I won't go on too long here. But it just seems like you're talking too much about security characteristics of an implementation, and
But this
it
is
seems
not
like
about the implementation of the protocol. This is about the protocol is applicable to implementations of hardware or environments that have the following properties. If you meet these, it's saying this protocol is applicable to you.
But
it's not about how you implement the protocol.
Okay, let me try another way here. You could use the Teep protocol just fine if you didn't meet like number 1 down there. If, let's say, unauthorized code could execute, okay, sure.
So Ben Kadek, sorry to jump in. I think maybe, Lawrence, what you're saying is that there's a question between, do you want the decision of applicability being made by the person who would be deploying it or the person who would be defining the protocol?
Yeah. I think that's right. Yeah.
Because yes, you're right. The protocol could be used by things that it's not applicable for. That's true for just about any protocol. You can use it for things that it wasn't designed for. This is saying it's a design space. Sorry, Hannes, go ahead.
Yeah, I think to me it makes a lot of sense to provide more background information and more context in an architecture document, and to explain a little bit what the anticipated deployment environment is. But I agree, of course, at the protocol level itself, like you could run it locally, like 2 scripts talking to each other and using the protocol. The protocol wouldn't care much. But I think for the architecture, which is this discussion, I think providing that extra context is actually quite valuable, because there is a lot of technology context and history around these DEs that you need to understand in order to use them properly. It's not just, it doesn't fall out of thin air. It's the same as with attestation. Like you could think of the attestation working as a JSON document, and you can use JSON documents in all sorts of contexts. But then that there's this whole architecture around how people use attestation and sort of like what systems you want to utilize it with is obviously more complex.
I mean, to sort of go on a little more, like in the attestation, I mean, I've been arguing all along in attestation that attestation should be able to run in an unsecured Android app, or it should be run in a secure element. And all of those are in scope, and in attestation, we don't care. We're just defining a protocol, and that's, you do what you want for that, right? So, so to me, it would be.
The Teep charter is narrower.
Okay, perhaps, but I mean, I just get suspicious anytime you're trying to say something about the security environment of when you're defining a protocol, when you're trying to talk about the security of the environment that it runs in, seems like an overstep to me. So I'm going to end there with one more comment, and that is in FIDO, we defined what was called an ROE, a restricted operating environment, as a sort of a broader thing that covers TEs and SGX and VBS and somebody that just solders a really nice CPU somewhere on the board it's isolated or something like that. So we just use the term ROE instead of TE. Sure, yeah, there's a nice document and all that normative.
Ben, were you in line? Okay. So one of the things that I've heard so far is that there's some discussion that belongs in the security consideration section, and I don't know if it's in there or not, that Hannes was summarizing, right? Some expectations around TEs and discussion of isolation and things like that would make sense to have someplace. If that's not part of the definition, then we still need to cover the definition. And as I mentioned, there are 2 problems that people raised with the original definition in the document. And so I guess my question is, if there's appropriate text that gets put into security considerations and elsewhere, then are there any objections to the definition on the bottom of the slide? With appropriate other text that goes elsewhere about the different constraints and different variations of TEs, are there any objections to having the text on the bottom be the definition of a TEE that this working group uses as the definition of all TEEs or all things that we're talking about as TE would fit this, and there's various variations among them? there's no objections, I will go ahead and merge that one and continue to work on text about isolation and so on. Text suggestions welcome. Rich.
Yeah, Rich Sauls. Authorized code, is that to be defined later or explicitly not to be defined?
It is
Either
actually
answer is
defined in the
fine.
it's defined in the document by
Okay.
code that is authorized by the device administrator.
Fine, good.
Meaning that there's actually that part, nobody has yet raised that the text in the document is unclear. Maybe it is, but nobody has yet said that. So.
Sorry to interject here, Dave. Gary Mundy, I'm Qualcomm. And when I was looking through this document while revising the each security consideration section, I had a lot of trouble here trying to figure out how TA to TA isolation is handled in this document. And this definition really muddies it for me because because you're basically saying that only authorized code can execute within the TE. Data used by that code cannot be read or tampered with by code outside of the TE. But we need a similar requirement for the code for within the TE as well, that TA to TA isolation.
That was the question I was asking Hannes, is if you have something like a secure element that supports one security domain that supports multiple TAs in there, are you saying that is not a TEE? Because and they even use the term TEE. Because if it doesn't provide isolation within a security domain, only between security domains. So, and
Yeah.
I'm okay either way. I'm just saying, I'm asking you what you're arguing. So
I don't. So I think when I looked at it in the context of attestation, I was thinking of an example where two TAs are providing two separate attestation services to the rich execution environment. Those two TAs should form their own trust domains.
sorry, I realize I phrased my question wrong because if it only has one security domain, it probably is not a TEE. A better way to phrase the question is the concept of a security domain, which is covered in a different issue I'll have a later slide on, okay, is where you have multiple TAs in a security domain, and you can have multiple security domains, 0 or more on a device, right?
Okay.
There's isolation between security domains, but within a security domain, there's not isolation between TAs. Okay? And so just saying every TA is isolated from every other TA ignores the concept of a security domain that says, I would like some sharing that doesn't have isolation between this little set.
Fair enough. If you can, and you can define a security domain to be only one TA potentially, right? So,
And that is the normal case, and the document does say that, although we'll get to the security domain issues later on.
okay, thanks.
So feel free to jump back up at the mic when we talk about security domains, which is coming up soon. All right. I know I'll try to group a set of issues to the things that are relevant to the suit working group, followed by another section of issues that are things relevant to the RATS working group. Okay. Followed at the very end by a couple things that are sort of more agnostic, meaning not specific to either of them. Okay. So now we're in the section, if you are here from the suit working group, and I saw my suit co-chair come in a minute ago and sit down, so thank you. All right. Remember, the architecture document was previously written before the text that's in there was written before the working group decided to take a dependency on the suit manifest. So there's some text in there that's obsolete or perhaps needs to change in some other way. And so here are three related issues, 13, 34, 35, that are all kind of about how you deal with dependencies, either on TAs, say, a untrusted application depends on a TA, or a TA depends on something, like this TA depends on that TA, or this TA depends on this version of a trusted OS, or this TA depends on this version of trusted firmware, or whatever. Expressing dependencies in general is what these three issues are, right? The bottom one is dependencies on a TA, other ones are dependencies from a TA. Actually, the bottom two are dependencies on TAs, and the top one is dependencies from a TA. Okay. So we had working group consensus in Teep to use the suit manifest for dependencies from TAs. Okay, suit manifest describes all the particular TA and everything it depends on. Okay, that's separate from a normal client an untrusted application manifest. It's the manifest format that comes from or maybe is used with your favorite app store or whatever. That's not the suit manifest. Okay? That's just whatever you're already using in your app store. And so the draft already has some text talking about the untrusted apps manifest, which is not a suit manifest, right? It's whatever manifest that they're using now, that can express dependencies on TAs. But all the other issues are about expressing dependencies from TAs. Okay. So I generated a pull request with a straw man, and the summary of that is to add a reference to the suit manifest, as it's now in the references section, and explain that the suit manifest is what expresses dependencies from TAs. So everything a TA depends on, whether it's another TA, whether it's in a trusted OS inversion, whether it's a trusted firmware inversion, whatever it is, that's the job of the suit manifest to say what the dependencies from this TA is. Okay. Now, some of those issues up top, I think at least two people, Eric Nordmark was one of them, I forget who the other one was, that talked about, well, what happens if I rev something that where something else depends on it? Then that could be app compat issues, right? So if I rev a TA, it could maybe break an untrusted application. Or if I rev trusted firmware, it could break a TA. Or if I rev one TA, it may break another TA that depends on it. Okay. And so we would add a discussion that says there's compatibility issues, and in your implementation, you need to be aware of that. Doesn't say exactly how to, it just says there is a solution here. You could do that by disallowing changes or whatever it is, right? Okay. So here is actual text from the pull request that I will let you stare at for a second in case somebody wants to pick on a particular wording now, but the intent was the bullets on the bottom the two bullets on the bottom of the previous slide. This is my intent, or my text that would potentially capture that. The ... in the middle means later slide inserts text in the middle of those two paragraphs for a different issue. We'll leave that up there for a second so you can all stare at it. It's been up there on GitHub, but I'm not going to assume that anybody here has read the GitHub pull request, so this is your chance to pick on stuff. Right? A lot of the text previously that talked about dependencies is then replaced by this text, because we're basically saying the Teep is not going to solve this problem. That's suit's job. And so there's less that we have to say. We incorporate it by reference using the suit manifest. Okay. If there's no objections, I'm going to move on. Okay, I've left it up there for a minute or so. Moving on. I said we were going to get to security domains. This is it. Okay. So there's this long-standing issue, number 7, right back in the single-digit days, that was to clarify this meaning of what do we mean by security domain that we've been talking about at every working group meeting since we started. Jürgen also called this out, saying, I don't know what the security domain thing is, in his issue number 70. And we had recently filed issue number 62 with the title Editorial Update for Full SD or SD Full Removal, although some of the discussion in the issue was that maybe we didn't mean full after all, but still. We had working group consensus to remove security domain as a formal concept. Okay? But we still realize that some TEs will have security domains in them, like secure elements or things that are global platform compliant. But it's not a formal concept in here. It may be a side effect or things you deal with in an implementation, but it wasn't something you explicitly called out as an element in the protocol per se. So here is the pull request that would propose to do what issue number 62's discussion was from previous IETFs. This is my reading of what we discussed and how I might attempt to accomplish that as an editor. So there's two different pull requests, number 72 and then part of 75. Okay. There's discussions in API names, like create security domain was a specific API name. We said, well, we're going to remove that. Remove the OTRP message name, especially since we're moving from the OTRP protocol to the Teep protocol. So we don't have to talk about the OTRP message names, like create security domain. Remove the explicit entry of security domain from the terminology section, which makes it sound like there's a formal concept. Depend on these. This is the main point, how it's related to suit, which is if there's a dependency on something that's part of the install steps, in order to install this TA, I have to create a security domain, and then I can install the TA. Okay, you can express that in the suit manifest. In the suit manifest, you say, here's a set of install steps. You can have an install step in the manifest that says create security domain, or something that has that as an effect, right? So this is a way of saying we can accomplish the create security domain inside the suit manifest as long as the suit working group accepts this as a requirement and has a way to solve it, okay? Which we will potentially talk about in the suit working group meeting, which is just after lunch. But last point here, still include the security domain informatively in example text. And so so like Ming, for example, felt strongly about this one, which is we still need to explain what it means in a global platform environment for a TE that has this concept of security domains. What does it mean, right? So at least use it as an example. Okay. So here is an example, and this was that ... that was on my previous slide. So the first paragraph is the one that you saw on the previous one, and the bold paragraph is the new one that's inserted in that ... And so you can see, for example, this is clearly informative text, and it talks about T's compliant with global platform may have a notion of a security domain. And here you can see, not in the terminology section, this is defining inline because it's not a formal concept of Teep. And if we agree, then this is expressing the dependency on suit to make sure the suit manifest is capable of expressing this as an installation step. Ben.
Ben Kadek, just pointing out that the Internet Security Glossary RFC 4949 does have a definition of security domain, which it just calls domain, but it has an alias.
It does, but it's not the same one as global platform.
Yep.
But yes, that is a good point, which is potentially another reason to define it in line down here in the context of global platform and not as some formal concept. Okay. So I believe that this paragraph here would address, if Ming was here, I don't know if he's actually remote.
He's on the line.
Okay, Ming, do you want to come to the mic and say your opinion on this one? Thank you.
Gotta wait for him.
Can you see me?
Okay, Ming, you're on.
Okay, go ahead. Okay, hi. Thank you for presenting there. Yeah, so this have a long history discussion, right? This have the security domain where we officially remove it as a formal concept. We don't support it. But there's still a large section of devices there which will involve security domain. It's a reality, right? I would say give this informal text. So for those of the users, we'll give some of this class here so they have a way to support it. That was my stance, right?
So Ming, do you have any issues with the specific paragraph being shown which talks specifically about security domains and what the meaning is?
I say it's good. I like it.
It's good, okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
I like it.
Yeah. Since you were the one that was
Yep.
vocally asking for such a statement, I want to make sure this actually could meet your requirements. So
It does,
Okay.
yeah.
Great.
Yeah, I reviewed the issue. Yes, I did.
Okay.
Thank you.
Because assuming we agree with these principles, then I have something like 10 minutes or whatever in the suit working group today, this afternoon, to report out on whatever the Teep working group decides is requirements for suit. I have a spot to report that out to the rest of the suit working group. I know some of you are in this room right now, but that is Dave and I talked about that on the agenda today. So, yeah. Okay. Unless there's any other comments, I'm going to move on, saying silence is at least no objection.
Yeah, I'm taking silence as agreement.
Okay,
so
great.
we'll move on.
Okay. Then there was this discussion or this use case that says, I want to keep secrets from the TAM. In other words, I'm a SP, or was it a security provider, that has applications that I want to distribute, but I don't want, and I want to keep them in secret. You know, the code for them could be encrypted, or the data for them could be encrypted. I don't want the TAM to have the key to decrypt it. Okay, so I just want to use the TAM as an intermediary. This is a discussion we had previously. That Ming, I see is at the mic again, was leading this discussion before. And so this is summarizing what's in the issue. We said the encrypted binary could be delivered just like an unencrypted binary, which means that the TAM doesn't have the key because it doesn't really know whether it's encrypted or not. It's just a file, which just means the decryption key would have to be delivered separately, not through the TAM, because the TAM doesn't have the decryption key. And so then how would you deliver the decryption key? And the discussion, and this long back and forth from different people, mostly David and myself and Ming and maybe Hannes in this issue. You could get it through Teep by a different TAM, such as the SP running their own TAM that's just for purpose of handing out the key. That was one proposal. The current text in the document says the following, though, which is the problem. The current text in the document says for any client app, this is the untrusted app, right? There should only be a single TAM to contact, okay? And then the SP should provide the TAM with all the TAs that the app requires. In other words, the implication is that in your client app, your untrusted app manifest, you say, and here's the TAs and here's the TAM, and you're going to get all the TAs from the same TAM. So if you get all the TAs and all their dependencies, everything that it depends on from the same TAM, well, now what does it mean when you want to get the binary from one TAM but get the decryption key from a different TAM? That kind of contradicts, and so the current text rules out the ability to do that particular proposal. So what do? That's what this issue is. Okay. There's at least two different options that we could go here, and I'm going to ask Ming to jump in after I get down to the bottom of the slide here. Option number one is what is closer to what the text currently says in the document, or at least that text that I showed, which is there's a single TAM for the TA and all the dependencies. Okay. What that really means is that the TAM for every dependency is assumed to be the same as the depending TA. So what this means is that the service provider then it has no choice. It says, I now have to host all the TAs that depend on me, right? Because if I'm only going to give out the decryption key from me, then everything that depends on me has to use me as well. Okay, so it'll be option number one. Option number two is to change that text, say that to imply that there can be a separate TAM for each dependency. And so the information about each TAM comes out of a manifest file, which is how you get the dependency information. So you'd have to have for every dependency what the potential TAM URI is if it's different from the main one. Okay. And of course, if a TA depends on another TA, the other TA could have its own suit manifest file for that matter. So if we did this, the way this would work is I'm going to install a particular TA, and I learn its dependencies, and so I got to install the dependencies. So now I have a request to install these dependencies, and that comes in just like a request to install a TA from untrusted app. I need to install this TA, so you kind of invoke it recursively. Okay, and so it would work kind of the same way as it would right now. As it would in the untrusted app depending on a TA, right? A TA that depends on opt or on a firmware update or on another TA. It would go through, talk to the TAM, get its suit manifest, apply the steps, and then continue on with the original installation. That would be option two. Maybe there's other options. Ming, you're in the queue. I'm going to hand it off to you right now since this was partly your issue. So go ahead.
Did he
You
just
just
drop
disappeared.
From the queue? Yeah. Let me put him back on.
Not intentionally.
No, I
Press the button.
didn't.
Maybe he dropped. Okay.
Hey, Ming, can you try and join again? Because I'm not seeing him on the queue.
Okay. Well, we can talk about it in the room here until he comes back in. Oh, here he
There
comes.
we go.
Yay.
Okay, next time I'll kick him off. So
Go ahead, Ming.
I recall, if I recall correctly, in the interim meeting, right? Interim meeting, we have quite some debate on this one.
Yep.
I thought we came away with option two. Initially, I thought David Wheeler is more strong on the option one, so bundled together later. Okay, if you have an end-to-end security, SP is your job. You host that. I don't delegate to another one you do not trust. But the impression we came with that option two is that I was saying not really just that single one, because most time you don't have too many TAs, right? If depending on if a secret one, and you can have a public TA you download from some public more shared TAM, and for some more sensitive TA you get it from SP.
I know we had a discussion prior to the discussion of having encrypted stuff. We just said, what do we do with dependencies? And for that, that's where some of the text in the document came from that says when you just have dependencies, we said it would be a lot simpler if you could just get it from the same one, right? This notion of how do I get a decryption key came after that and said, well, that causes problems with the previous assumption, and that's where we got to the current state.
That's right. So because that was because decryption, you need to talk with that
with the SP
key holder directly, right?
Yeah.
I thought that was where I thought,
Right.
okay, split is
so-
okay. That was my
So this is
impression.
why the text in the document does not match kind of what the issues in discussion have been, is because of that history. So I think Hannes is also in line now.
Yeah, it's Hannes. I tried to put some text in the issue, and I hope I ultimately did, based on the discussion there. The problem was a little bit that on one hand, you have the TAM, you rely on it for distributing the trusted application, but then you actually don't trust it entirely, and so you have some other party behind it who provides the trusted application, the service provider. And the question was, like, what's the interaction? Because there has to be a key, as you said, like distribution there. When you send the encrypted trusted application and associated metadata through the DAM, and how does that work and how does that fit into the architecture? Because that entity is actually the entity then behind the DAM, the service provider, is not really, there's no protocol interaction. And so the conclusion there, at least from what I recall, was like, okay, then we call this other party then also a DAM, which kind of makes sense. Of course, there's
That's
it's still
it's this phrase here,
Yeah.
but by a different service provider's TAM. That is from summarizing that text that's in the issue right now that you're talking about.
right. And of course, from a communication protocol point of view, there is, to me, which is not yet covered in sort of the solution work, is like, how does the message interaction really work? Do you talk to one DAM and then relay it, the messages, or do you actually talk to different DAMs then ultimately, which of course would be simpler?
I would say the latter, although you're
Yeah.
correct that there's no text.
Yeah.
Okay. So what I've heard so far seems to imply that as a working group, we want to go with option 2 if we can find the right text. Right? There's no pull request on this right now. That's just an open issue, right? I think option number 1 came from the discussion that we had with David Wheeler, who's not here right now. But is there anybody that is here, virtually, remotely, or present, that would have any other issues with going in direction number 2 if we can find the right way to do it in text? Otherwise, we will take it as an action item for editors to come up with a text that tries to accomplish the intent of option number 2.
Sounds
Okay.
fair.
Okay with you, Ming? Is that okay with you, Ming?
Ming, are
Yes,
you okay with that?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Okay.
I'm in the room. Okay, I agree. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Again, we can
Yeah,
confirm
yeah,
on the list, but we're
I'll
saying
favor option 2. Yeah.
tentative consensus to try to come up with option number 2, and the editors have action item to try to figure out how to do that.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, you can actually wait for the proposed text since I can't close the issue anyway.
Well, that's true. Yeah. Okay. All right. Next issue. Okay. Multiple TAM URIs for a TA. So this is issue number 14. And so I don't know if Ming wants to get back in the queue. Otherwise, I'm just going to summarize what his
I took
issue
them
is
off the
here.
queue.
Okay. Ming had proposed that a particular TA could be carried by multiple TAMs, and an example is if I have a particular TA and I distribute it and I distribute it along with, all right, I have an untrusted application I distribute to the Google Play Store, and an untrusted application I distribute to the Apple Store, and an untrusted application I distribute to the Microsoft Store, and they can all run on the same hardware or whatever, and so I'm going to use the same TA, but all 3 of these applications depend on them, okay? And so can I have the same TA binary that's hosted by multiple TAMs, such as one per app store as an example, right? And so his point was, well, yeah, you should be able to do that, right? And so then he proposed that you should be able to allow even multiple TAMs mentioned in the same manifest file for a TA, right? So I have different things that depend on it, and I go and fetch the manifest for it, and I get, here's multiple possibilities, and I get them through any of these TAs. So you can download it from any of those, and they're all equivalent. And so use the one you're already using, for example, right? If you have a dependent and you're already using one for the thing that depends on it, go ahead and use this because I see it in the list. Okay. And so only one of the TAMs needs to be contacted, and the others could be used as failover if the primary fails to respond. That's basically Ming's text. Okay. Oop. And so that seems reasonable to me. This is in the suit section because this means that when you have, if you have a TA that depends on another TA, then you need to have, it says there's a manifest requirement for expressing multiple URIs for where that particular binary could be found, not just a single URI. Seems reasonable to me. Any objections? Otherwise, this will go, we would come up with text here, and this would be relayed as another dependency or an ask to make sure that the suit manifest is capable of expressing this concept.
So I just have one clarification, because in the previous issue, the option number 2 was to allow for the agent to have multiple TAMs
Correct.
dependency.
That one was for multiple TAMs for different TAs. And of course, it may have to go to multiple of them because it has to get each TA. This one is somewhat orthogonal. It says to
It's
get
the
within
many.
a TA,
Okay.
I got multiple choices. I can go to any of these three
No,
places.
I was reading the previous one
Yeah,
wrong
yeah, yeah.
then. Because in the previous one, I thought it was one
They are
agent.
related. So let me go back here.
Yeah.
So for example,
So this is an agent managing multiple TAs. That's what I'm trying to.
in which one? Issue number 14.
Previous one.
Ah,
That
the yes, correct. Multiple components that need to be installed. It could be multiple TAs,
Okay.
or to put on some suit terminology here, a suit manifest can express dependencies on files. Your files may or may not actually be binaries. They could be anything. Okay. So, for example, you could have a binary and the configuration be separate IDs in a suit manifest. They could also be bundled together and say those are in the same file or whatever. But if you have them as being separate, you could say this binary depends on this configuration file, and you have to get them from different locations. Okay. And so this is extending, says the thing that you're depending on is not a TA per se, but it is an element in the suit manifest.
Okay.
And so if the way that you got the key, the decryption key here, right, this decryption key is delivered separately but by a different TAM, the TAM here is delivering a decryption key, not a binary. It could be a binary that has the decryption key in it, or it could just be the decryption key. And you'd call that not a TA, you'd call that another file that's pointed to by the manifest. Okay. So now we're up here that says, okay, for one of those files, which could be a TA or could even be something other than a TA, if you're talking about suit outside the scope of Teep, there could be multiple equivalent places you could get it from that have different URIs. Okay. And so the relationship is if you have one thing that depends on another thing, and I'll use two TAs here. I could have used a TA and say opti. I could have used a TA and trusted firmware. If I have two things, one that depends on the other, and let's say the thing that's being dependent on, let's say I'm going to depend on a particular version of opti, okay, that can be distributed through a TAM. Okay? Let's say that version of opti is accessible via 3 TAMs. The particular TA that depends on it that I'm trying to use is only accessible at one of those. Which opti TAM am I going to use? Probably the one I'm already talking to is going to be the most efficient, right? And so that's the relationship. Is this flexibility of having multiple says, if I'm already picking one for a depending thing, and I have multiple choices for the thing that it's depending on, then it gives me more freedom to be more efficient by picking the one I'm already talking to. So these two issues are related, but they're different issues. Okay. I see a couple nods out there, so hopefully that's clear enough. Did that answer your question, Nancy? Okay.
Yep.
All right.
Makes sense.
All right, so next topic, trust anchor storage. The original issue had a label that's kind of a misnomer, right? It was originally labeled as should the trust anchor format be specified in a separate draft. If you read the issue now, that's not what it's about anymore. It's actually about specifying the requirements for how you protect trust anchors, okay? Section 5.8 of the Teep architecture already says to protect trust anchors, or talks about protecting the trust anchors inside of a TEE. You store the trust anchors inside of a TEE for some of these things. The suit architecture has specific definitions of trust anchor and trust anchor store, which have language that was pulled out of this Teep issue that was put into the suit architecture document, because same question comes up in suit. And so I think Brendan had already pulled the text out of here into the suit architecture. The question is, what do you want to do in the Teep architecture? So we could copy the definitions from the suit architecture, given that we're depending on the suit manifest, and say now the text is the same text in both documents. We could say this document uses the definitions of trust anchor and trust anchor store as defined in suit architecture, and not copy them in here, just include them by reference and say as defined in there. Or we could take some other approach. Okay. Do people care, or that just the editors can do whatever we want? What'd you say? Hannes said, not at the mic, he prefers number 2. I don't know if anybody else has a preference. Oh, I see Russ back there also says thumbs up on number 2. Okay. Dave Waltermeyer. So we have the other suit chairs saying thumbs up on number 2. Okay. That's helpful direction to the editors. Thank you. All right. Then there's 2 issues that are related because I'm going to show them both in the same table. They're a little bit interrelated, which is about this term device secure storage. Okay, so figure 6 in the architecture document has a table, and I'm only showing or summarizing 2 rows and only a couple columns out of that table, which says here's a bunch of keys and certificates, and here's where they are, and here's the cardinality. Okay, and so it talks about you can have trusted firmware that has its own key pair and certificate, and you can have a TEE that has its own key pair and certificate. And what the document says right now is the trusted firmware's key pair and certificate are stored in what's called device secure storage, which is a term that's never defined. And the TEE has stuff that's stored in the device TEE. And it says the cardinality, the device secure storage, the trusted firmware has 1 per device, and the TEE used to say 1 per device. But issue number 30 was pointing out, well, that's not correct because the document already talks about that you can have multiple TEEs per device. And so it doesn't make sense to have things that's 1 per device when you have multiple per device. And so that's changed to say 1 per TE. That's the part that's in red there. But that still leaves the question of what the top middle box should say about device secure storage. So the filer in number 58, I forget who filed it, asked, what is this device secure storage? Should that say device TEE that's there? And I had responded in there saying, I don't think it's the device TEE because there are going to be multiple TEEs there, and you've only got 1 key for the trusted firmware. So what should it say? Okay, Hannes.
I was wondering whether we could recycle some of the discussions from the RATS group here who talked about the root of trust. And in some sense, what it boils down to in practice is then you rely on some sort of ROM code or code that can be then made sort of read-only at some point in time at the bare minimum.
Within the suit working group, there was a discussion a while back, probably more than a year ago, and the question in the suit working group was, should we, I'm going to roughly paraphrase how the question was asked, and the question was something like, should we use the term root of trust or should we use the term trust anchor? Now, or some other variation of that question, okay? And the suit working group said, and I'm looking at my co-chairs to either nod or correct me, that the 2 terms are not necessarily the same thing. The IETF tends to use trust anchor. We're going to use that term in the suit architecture document. And hopefully we don't need to use the term root of trust, but if it does, we'll use that in passing and explain the relationship. But we're going to use the term trust anchor. In RATS, the RATS architectures and documents tend to imply that root of trust is a term that applies to a piece of hardware. And that's why I said it may or may not be the same thing as trust anchor, depending on your definition of root of trust. Here you can see my proposal on what to say for device secure storage is to just there was text that was added to the definition of trust anchor store in the suit manifest that was it was a sentence or 2 that was out of the Teep issue that was expectations around trust anchor storage that around the security of that. My proposal was we make an equivalent statement for device secure storage and just use an almost identical text without saying that a trust anchor store and device secure storage is the same thing, just the requirements are the same. But yeah. What do you guys think?
Yeah, so for me, a trust anchor and root of trust is not the same.
Correct. Trust anchor here is often referred to as being like a public key or certificate.
But for me,
the trust anchor store and a root of trust is a more interesting comparison, but those may not be the same either.
Right.
And I see other people that might that I'm sure have opinions.
And also, I consider the root of trust more than just the key, but it's also and more than the hardware because there needs to be some software. But in many cases, like if you have trusted firmware, of course, trusted firmware is, or the firmware itself is organized in different layers, but there will be some code that you can replace and update, but at some point in time, you have to have some code in there and the key along with it that cannot be changed because otherwise someone who you may or may not like will change the code, and then security goes out of the window. But so in that sense, the secure storage then refers to like literally ROM or something similar, like code or some storage where you burn the fuses at some point in time. It's actually, when I posted the link to the list about the device hardware that I mentioned from ST
ROM and
Microelectronics.
eFuse are common examples of do that.
You can you can burn the fuse, and then you can't change the trust anchor anymore, and then that's it.
But your point is that's different from the device TEE, right? There is something ROM, eFuse, etc., which is different from, say, Trust Zone or SGX or whatever. Which was the filer's original question: is how do we define it? Okay, Gary.
Gary Mundium, Qualcomm. Just looking back into the common criteria TE protection profile, the way they define trusted storage seems to include not just TA persistent data, but also the trust anchor store. I guess, are you looking at device secure storage to be a superset of that of trusted storage, or do you think of it as being equivalent in the TE context?
My reading of the table, since I wasn't the person that wrote it, is a subset that everything in the table is a trust anchor store. Okay, so your trusted firmware has a trust anchor. Its store for the trusted firmware's key or certificate may be in a different location than a different component like the TEE. So, for example, if you have a device that has, I have a laptop that has both SGX and a TPM in it. Okay. It may have some trusted firmware or microcode or whatever in the processor. Those are three different things that maybe have the keys stored in three different places, like in the SOC, in the TPM, and inside SGX protected storage, sealed storage.
Okay, after Lawrence, I'm going to let Ming go.
So my comments are kind of in line with what I was saying before. Whenever you use the word secure or trusted, you're sort of trying to imply something is absolute, and I don't think anything ever is. So you have to say secure against what? Trusted for what? Is it, and if you're storing, it also matters if you're storing material that has to be immutable or stuff that needs to be secret. So if you're storing a public key, all you need is immutability. If you're storing a secret key, you need secrecy. So, and when I say, think about attacks. Okay, ROM, you say, well, that's cool, that's ROM. But if I got a FIB, a focused ion beam, I can change ROM, right? People do that, right? It depends on your attacker. What are you protecting? Are you protecting, the secrets of the atomic bomb?
So I realized it would have been useful for me to copy in the text that's in the suit manifest. It's that extra sentence that's the requirements around trust anchor store. I suspect that what you're talking about, that sentence tries to address. Whether it's sufficient or not, it would be a question to you, and I can't show it on the screen.
So it seems like all you can do in a protocol document, certification document's different. On a protocol document is you can just say secure storage is a place that is kind of for storing things like this, and how secure it is depends on certification and your requirements, and that's all you need to say.
I'm taking that as a yes to the proposal on the bottom is how I read that. You said somebody was in the queue.
Yeah, Ming.
Okay.
Hey,
yes,
Ming, you're
okay. Good. Yes, okay. Two comments here. First one about the original background of this, right? We talk about device secure storage is referred to the trusted firmware key. That was one per device. Then we have a separate, we have TE key. That once the TE key is one per TE, and we already, right, you have come here, one per TE. That is not TE. We do not mention the secure storage. So then come back that the trusted firmware key, that also is optional. We say it's not mandatory. It's not required for Teep to work, because some implementation may not have it.
For right, the like SGX has no notion.
Yeah, and then right, and for the trusted firmware key, original motivation was that it will be in hardware for the device, right? When for secure boot, you boot load somewhere, it's securely. We generally use secure storage. It means someone saying you equip even use fusion key, right? When they come out to the device manufacturer. So that was the general meaning at the time. and this trusted firmware key, the particular application applying to this trusted firmware key.
But Ming, to clarify and going to Lawrence's comment, when you say a manufacturer key, is that an immutable key?
Not mutable.
Not immutable.
I think what I got from Lawrence's point is that you shouldn't over-constrain that, right? So you shouldn't say whether it's mutable or immutable. You just say what it needs to defend against.
And
In general,
The
yes.
trust anchor store sentence that I'm referring to in the suit manifest does say, and it must resist. I don't remember how it's phrased, but it's like I must resist.
Well, the
must
considerations for the
right. Must be resistant
For
to
the
being
usage.
muted and that
Right.
kind of stuff. I don't remember how it's phrased.
This is Hannes. I like what Lawrence said, because indeed the terms trusted and secure have different meanings to different people and may vary in context. And I don't think this text was meant to be sort of overly constraining in any way. But so what I'm suggesting is maybe we could provide some examples here on what people typically do today. They may do it differently in the future, but I think that already gives a good indication to the reader on like what are the different sort of cases essentially. How's that?
Ming, did you say something?
Yeah, I think I agree. I think maybe we could give an example. I know actually I have a good talk with a few people on this one, and they have actually time we talk about the firmware key how to burn there. There was even we have some paragraph in the past how to do that, and then for the ARM chips has done. But maybe as a follow up, I think we can add some example here what that means. Because strict definition looks a bit tricky here as we are discussing, right?
Do we still have time?
I was just checking. Yeah, go ahead.
So in terms of defend against, I think defend against, like whether it's read, write, sign with, but don't give me the key, decrypt. That makes sense. If it's defend against, a script kiddie or a guy with the focused ion beam or a buffer overrun, that does not make sense.
I agree. Okay. All right.
So since he has time check, you have about 37 minutes left.
Okay.
So I heard.
I'm going to try to, unless the chair overrules me, I'm going to try to not call time on any particular issue as long because as editors, I want to know what to do on each item. Right?
Yeah, no, that's why I was doing the time check, just because I think it's important for you to get through all the issues. But to close on this one, I didn't hear any objections to the proposal, just an elaboration.
So we will attempt that and see
examples.
whether people like it.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Trust Anchor update. So this is issue number 32, also called out by Jürgen. The current text says it's out of scope to update trust anchors. It's out of scope to update, the set of certificates that you will consider trusted, like the TAM certificate that is in the device certificate in TAM. It says that's out of scope, and that a device manufacturer is expected to provide its trust anchors live update or out of band update to device administrators. So right now it says you don't use the Teep protocol or OTRP to update trust anchors. And two people ask, well, Teep is for provisioning TEEs, both code and data. If you're storing trust anchors in TEE, can't you use Teep protocol to update them? That's basically what the issue is asking. So the proposal is to allow that but not mandate it. Okay, so here's an example. A manufacturer could have a trust anchor manager TA with trust anchors and the configuration data for that TA. Just showing as an example, here's a way that you could actually use the Teep protocol to do it. You don't have to do it this way, but it's saying it would be applicable if you chose to do this. Especially since two people ask, isn't that what Teep protocol is supposed to, or Teep is supposed to be doing, is managing TEEs and provisioning them? Isn't this provisioning a TEE? It would just seem odd if the answer was no. That's kind of how it came across in the other two filers. So, Ben?
Ben Kadek, sorry, I was just looking at the text on the slide, and it seems to imply that the ability to update the trust anchor is mandatory. And given some of the previous discussion we had about root of trust and blowing fuses, do we actually want that to be mandatory in this case?
I need to explain because they're not actually talking about the same thing. Okay. Yeah. let me go back here. This right here, I said is only a subset of the rows and only a subset of the columns. I'm actually jumping over to another column now, and I'm sorry I didn't make that be clear before. I understand the confusion. Okay, this is talking about you have the TE, and you have the TE has the key pair for itself. So in other words, you have a private key because it's about you. Okay, so it's like your own a trust anchor for yourself. Separately from that, you have the set of, say, public keys that you trust. Okay, but you don't have the private key for. That's information about somebody else. This is about updating those. The public keys that you consider trusted, or the certificates you consider trusted. How do I update those? Because that is mutable. How do I do ownership transfer, right? How do I say, your new TAM key, because your TAM just revved its certificate, and here's your new TAM certificate. Can I update that? Because I do key rollover, or I do certificate refreshment as it gets close to the TTL. Can I use Teep to revision the new certificate that has a new TTL? Can I do that?
I mean, I guess I think what I'm saying is that I agree we should provide some mechanism or considerations for people who want to do this sort of update.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering if there's also going to be a case where people want to forbid this type of update for a particular device.
Yes.
That's a good point.
Yes, it's a good point. And that's why in the proposal here, there's the word may down there in lowercase. But yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah, but along the same lines of Ben, I think there would be probably be a policy question here as well, whether you are able and allowed to do that. And also practically, if there may be different layers of keys even on a device, and so different types of trust anchors, and some may not be modifiable or updatable. And that's just a deployment strategy and preference, and you can't have, the protocol can't change that. But having the possibility to update them makes total sense to me.
Ming? Oh, I think we kicked him out again. Come back, Ming.
Ming,
You're up
sorry.
next.
Try it again.
Yeah. No, I'm good. I'm good. I don't have comments here. I think it's
Okay, all right.
it's a scope. I think it cannot be mandatory to me. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. This is to allow it to be allowed where previously it was declared to be out of scope, as opposed to, you could use it. Okay. Moving on. We may add to this based on discussions, but this is just my list of things that some of the things we've talked about that I would then relay to suit as things that would depend on that the suit manifest may or may not already provide. And so to say, hey, Teep would be making use of the following things. You may already provide them. If so, hey, Brennan, great. Tell us how they're already there. Or if not, consider adding them. All right. Now I'm going to move on off of the suit-related ones over to the RATS-related ones. Okay. So as a reminder, the Teep working group previously has had consensus to say, rather than doing attestation in the Teep protocol or Teep working group, we would like to just push that over to the RATS working group and not have to compete with them, but just use them and be a consumer of their technology. Okay, and so that's not what the architecture document had before, and so these are issues that would relate to that discussion as to how to handle that.
I just want, Dave Woltemeyer, I just wanted to mention, you've raised a few issues of requirements on suit. I just wanted to have a brief conversation today about how we might capture those requirements so that, suit's not going to work on the manifest forever. We need to make sure that as we're finishing it up, we have addressed everything. So I'd like to have some discussion about a mechanism. If you do that now or later, I'm good either way. But I think it's worth talking about.
In this
how to
working
do
group
that.
or in suit are you talking about?
Well, I mean, it would be useful for this working group to provide us with a list of requirements that that we could then act on.
That's what we were doing here. This is my pre-list,
How
and I
formal
will
a
update
process?
this.
Right. How formal a process are you expecting? Because I thought we went
I'm gonna
through
put it in
the
slides.
issues, right?
Yeah, I mean, it could be a wiki. It could be. I mean, we just need some place that we can go to
Okay.
make sure
So
that we've addressed
my action
everything.
item is to take this slide and update it with what I've heard, because we went through a couple different things that may not be on here. Like this might be the complete list of things that we said might be new dependencies that we've never specifically asked for, but may or may not be there. So I would take this slide here as the conveyance mechanism and carry this into the suit working group and present this slide as being asked from Teep to say, can you tell us whether these are already met, and if so, please, if not, please consider them.
And
so this is the equivalent of the wiki that you're asking for.
Right, but at that point, would this be the final list, or will that list continue to change over time? Because if it's going to change, it would be useful to have some authoritative place where we can find the latest.
I don't know of anything that would change because there's a bunch of issues filed. The document is getting close as far as the technical issues go.
Right.
And unless somebody files a new issue, right?
I wouldn't close it into saying this is the final list. So one of the things that we could do is, I'm just wondering if we could list it as a suit requirements issues and then give the suit, I don't know who, access to the, so we're running our issue tracker through GitHub.
Yeah, so you could tag an issue as a suit issue or something like that.
That's good.
Right.
So will that work?
Yeah.
I think the suit chairs would like to look ahead to say, how do we get the suit manifest to last call? What is the process and the timeline for doing that is kind of what Dave is asking. Thank you.
That's right. And the other thing to think about too is like what extensibility will Teep need in the suit manifest to address anything beyond that? That's something we should have a conversation about at some point.
Previous Teep interim meeting that was in the first half of this year sometime, Brendan gave a presentation on the suit manifest, the Teep working group, and explained, yep, I think everything that you guys are doing could be used to, the suit manifest could be used for, and at that time, all the things that we had talked about as a requirement he thought was already met. These are things we did not talk about there, and so they may or may not already be met in what he has right now. But we have had discussions with Brendan for almost a year now.
Yeah. Okay, so is it sufficient then for, so a couple things. So Dave now is the architecture editor and issue tracker. You can either tag them one by one or create a general one to get it kickstarted, if you will, right?
So since these are requirements for the suit manifest, we could do these by filing GitHub. If the suit manifest is in GitHub, we could file GitHub issues against the suit manifest draft and tag them as Teep.
That would be fine too. Is that okay? Hannes, you're in the room. Is that okay with the manifest authors?
Is the suit manifest in GitHub right now? Yes? Okay. Then we could use GitHub issues on the suit manifest document.
Okay, let's do that then.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is that the preference? Okay. Can we note that in the Etherpad notes, please? Who's ever taking notes? Thanks.
All right. So we're ready to move on to the RATS related discussion, the attestation discussions?
Yes. Okay. You now have 27 minutes left.
So I'll continue until you tell me to stop.
Yep.
And if we don't get through everything, if there's spare time tomorrow, we could use more time tomorrow.
We can do that.
Okay. All right. All right, here's attestation. There's at least 3 issues that are related to attestation that are comments on the attestation text in the document. And now that we've said we're not going to do attestation, hopefully a lot of this can be addressed by removing text and replacing with just a reference to RATS things. And so, for example, 17 is about this notion of an attestation key that might not be available because it is a bunch of discussion on attestation keys. 31 is talking about seeds for attestation, the attestation hierarchies, has a whole bunch of details about attestation. 70 has talking about the Teep architecture has discussions of specific crypto algorithms and which versions of which crypto algorithms are okay, which is also details about attestation. And his point was that list can get out of date over time, and maybe the informative architecture document is not the right place to have normative requirements around crypto algorithms. That's what that one says. So all this is about problems with that existing text. With the agreement that the Teep protocol should just depend on stuff coming out of RATS, the proposal is that the ArcDoc should instead explain the relationship between Teep and attestation, reference the RATS architecture, and leave all the protocol details to either the Teep protocol spec, if it's a Teep protocol issue, or to a RATS thing if it's a RATS issue. And specifically, text that would be removed would be information talking about anything being signed by an attestation key or seeding of attestation keys or specific crypto algorithms for attestation. All that text would just go away. That's the proposal. I see nods. Any objections? Saying we're going to keep it out, keep all the attestation details out of here and just explain the relationship to RATS and leave it to RATS.
Just reference rats.
Yeah, correct. By reference, whether it's to the architecture document or to a specific solution proposal, if that becomes relevant. So,
yeah.
But that would be more likely from the Teep protocol to reference a specific solution.
So Lawrence Lundblade, co-author of the document in rats. So on the first of the keys and seeding and all that, that makes some sense to me. The crypto algorithms, I think we're going to leave that a lot to profile documents, and I don't know how the profile documents get factored. Like I don't know if the RATS working group, what profile documents the RATS working group will construct, and I don't know whether they will be suitable for Teep, and probably wouldn't be something we would want to do. So you might want to actually have a profile document for Teep that would do handle that.
Our charter says we will.
Okay.
Yeah.
But it's not the architecture document.
Correct.
So yes, we've already accepted that as a ask from RATS. We said yes, we will do that, and so there's a bullet or a line or something that was added to the charter.
Yes.
Gary Mundium, Qualcomm, also a co-editor of the RATS deliverable, the entity attestation token document. Is continuing on with the a Teep specific profile for attestation. I guess one of the things I struggled with while reviewing the Teep architecture was what concepts are so fundamental they should form claim profiles within the EAT document itself. One thing as an example could be, for instance, identifiers on the device that are service provider specific. Can we just is the proper way forward not to address Teep specific aspects of attestation within the RATS working group and have it be addressed all within that Teep profile, including, for instance, identifiers that could be customized on a service provider basis rather than identifiers that are universal across the device.
Are you going to respond to it, or
you can respond first.
Okay? My opinion, I don't know what other editor's opinion is that in general, the answer I would say is yes, all the details should be in a Teep claims profile stuff. There may be cases where if there's some decision that's made within RATS of which Teep is a user of, you might want to, then the RAT should be free to say, an example of something that would use this is the Teep mechanism, and so you might use it as an example. Okay.
Yeah,
and so I don't want to preclude RATS from ever mentioning Teep because it may be useful by way of example, just like we have various examples in the Teep architecture, like global platform, an example that I showed before.
Yeah, I think I have a similar stance, which is, Gary and Lawrence, you should not feel obligated to include anything Teep specific in the RATS working group documents. I mean, if you think that there's something that we're doing that has a more general utility, and you think on your normal criteria for including widely used claims or whatnot in the EAT document, by all means do that, but don't feel like you're obligated to have anything specifically for us.
Right. Two analogies, one security domain, the other one the suit manifest. In the security domain, we said we're going to remove it from any formal concept, but we're going to still reference it by way of example. This is, if you have a security domain, here's how you can use our stuff. Okay, that's the security domain example. What was the other example I just said? I was going to have the suit manifest. So we said if we have some requirements we're passing to suit, and suit puts some of those has a way to meet those requirements that Teep is currently the only user of those, then the suit manifest should be able to say an example of a reason why they would use this is because they're going to be used by the Teep protocol. They should be allowed to say that. Okay? And so I'm just giving you the same answer I would use if Brendan asked me the same question for the suit manifest.
We should move on.
Okay. Next one. The document still has some text here about saying that the TAM needs to actually validate the device cert, right? And so basically the device cert is basically the attestation information. So you can think of the device cert here, if you're a RATS person, you can think of this as relying party validation of attestation results. That would be my generic RATS phrasing of the title here, okay? And so the document currently has some stuff saying, it should be validated by a TAM with, such and such. And you're going to ask, why is that a should be validated and not a must be validated? It's his question. Okay. So it'd be like saying, if the document in a RATS document said a relying party should validate attestation results from a verifier, and you're going to ask, why is that should and not must? That would be an equivalent question. This is just the Teep instantiation. So we could remove discussion of what a relying party does and just sort of incorporate that by reference, that when RAT specifies what relying parties do with attestation results, that will just automatically apply. We could leave the should as is, but elaborate on why. So the text would be similar, but we just answer Jürgen's questions in here. Or we could change it to must. Okay.
Ben Kaduk, so I think there's maybe two things going on here. I mean, there's validating that, you know, it's signed by a trusted thing and chains up properly, and then there's the rest of the sentence, which is about essentially revocation information.
Yep, correct.
And I think what, you know, me looking at the sentence, and, you know, if I was doing ISG review or something on it, I would say the intent of this is probably that you have to do any revocation checking that your ecosystem requires. CRLs and OCSP are like the common ways to do that, so we say you should do those. But if you have some other way of checking revocation information, or you know that there will never be any revocation information in your particular deployment, then obviously you don't have to check the CRL because there isn't one. And so that's where the should comes in, which is that, you know, this is the common way to do the operation that you're required to do. But if you have a different way to do that operation, you can still do that.
I hear you're arguing for number 2, and I would use the audio from what you just said in the recording as the elaborate on why to put into text.
Okay, and yeah, just please also be clear that there's a distinction between checking revocation information and you know, validating the signature chain.
Yep.
Okay, hold on, Ming. Ming, you're on.
Yes. I also second number 2, right? I say that actually most about my original text here. First one to know that the RATs will be implemented by all the times in the server side. But this device certificate check is a standard way, right? That's a standard way to check the verification. I would like to leave it there, just explain the should part. No.
Okay. So for 2 people for 2 so far. So if you're going to object to 2, speak up. Otherwise, 2 is the leaning so far. Go ahead, Lawrence.
So I'm not sure I would line up with any of those options, or maybe it's one. You're presuming X509 certificate chains here. We are not presuming that in E or RATs. And this has a lot to do with the manufacturing and other issues of putting attestation keys into chips and devices, which is not a straightforward thing at all. So the expectation is that some people might even put symmetric keys in and have some sort of a web service that you submit to the chip vendor, and they'll tell you if something is valid or not. So it seems like you have to leave a big open space there for how that kind of validation is going to happen. And maybe it's CRLs, maybe we reinvent and it's all CBOR based certificates, and we call them something else. I mean, it seems like there's a whole range of stuff here. So I'm not sure which option I'm picking, but that's the comment.
So you're making me realize that the text that I'm pulling from here, I think this is partly what Ben was saying, is that some of the text here can apply independent of attestation. It's just whatever the certificates that the Teep protocol is using for its own authentication or encryption or whatever, which might be separate from the attestation part. But for the attestation, I get your point. If Teep is using X509 certs for Teep purposes, then it would still apply for that. But yeah, I get your point.
Russ Housley, I was going to say a lot of that with the dependency on COSE and so on. This seems very PKIX oriented. It's also full of shoulds and musts that we just said we aren't going to use.
That is true. Yes, creating this slide, I couldn't presume the answer to the previous slide. Yes, you're right.
Yeah, I think that was very good input. It seems that we have to revisit this section or this paragraph altogether, because when Ben came to the mic, this the should was exactly there because of those the qualifications with the CRLs and OCSP. But indeed, as we switched over to use some of those other techniques like the COSI and Jose stuff, we should also think about whether we really rely only on X509 certificates, and specifically also keep in mind now that we untangle sort of the attestation work from the use of potentially a different key for the protocol messages. I think that needs to be brought out a little bit more clearly, and they may not even be the same types of key. You may use a X509 certificate for one versus sort of something else in the other, like a raw public key or so.
So I'm going to, based on Russ's comment, I'm going to add a number 4 there and see what people think. Number 4 would be to move the discussion to the Teep protocol spec and keep it out of the architecture document. I saw 2 thumbs up from Russ, because this is the point about if we're not going to use the normative must, should, mays in here, does it make sense for these to use must, should, mays? If so, the Teep protocol spec is a better place for that. And so everything that we just said would still apply. It would just apply to Hannes's presentation instead of mine.
So in the interest of time,
Any objections to going with number
Objections,
4
yeah.
and making it be the problem of the other doc? Okay.
it's good for punting. Okay.
How are we doing on time now? Do we still...
We may need to
Okay.
do your other issues tomorrow.
Okay, that's fine. Okay,
Yeah.
but I can finish the RATS section? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. This is the RATS profile point that Laurent brought up. There is no issue in GitHub yet. I think this is the only slide that I have that no GitHub issue was filed yet, and there's none that's filed yet because it wasn't obvious before, and that's part of the question here is there any change as what document would you file it against, or is it just in a new document? So here the question is whether and to what extent the architecture document should talk about this concept. Okay, so to you, if you are new to the RATS discussion here, in order to use RATS work, you need a list of what claims that a TAM is expecting to come in. Now, if you look in the OTRP protocol spec where it does attestation itself, you will find a bunch of specific elements that's in there that could be used to help generate that list. That's in a protocol spec, not an architecture document, right? So currently no official list exists, but you could derive one from that. And so the question is, should the architecture doc have anything? Is it just in the Teep protocol spec, or is it in some new Teep document that's the RATS the claims profile? Okay. Because there's no issue, the presumed answer is anything other than number 1. But if you think it needs to be number 1, or that the architecture document should at least mention the existence of this, then there would be something to say, even if it's by reference to another doc. Okay, Ben.
Ben Kalek, this feels like something that would pretty naturally fit into the Teep profile of the RATS work.
Correct. Is that a new doc, or is it in the protocol spec? Is only a difference between 2 and 3?
My preference would be 3.
Okay, so unless you want to get an object to number 3, then the list goes in here, and then the bullet underneath 3 that's implied is, should the architecture document then mention its existence? Or should the architecture document continue to remain silent on this topic? The latter is less work for us, but
Okay.
we want to do the right thing.
Ming is on. You're on, Ming.
Yeah, I moved. Yeah. Well, actually, my point is I shouldn't mention it. Even a separate document, we need to mention it, right? I understand that then option 3, you put at least in a new Teep document that will specify those profiles. But architect told me you should point it because attestation is a part of it. It should point to that.
So we have a Teep milestone, which we may not meet, but the Teep milestone says we wanted the architecture document to go to last call in December. Okay? And there's not a document to reference yet is the only problem with number 3 if we wanted to reference it. Okay, you could say left for future work, and it's because my intent is between now and December, we will have an editor's copy and then generate a new submission of the internet draft. And then the chairs can then decide whether to put that to working group last call or follow some other process. But we want to have a new document before December. Meaning,
I see that impact.
December 5th-ish.
Yeah, I see that impact. Yeah.
That may be a little
That's
aggressive.
the question for tomorrow.
Yeah.
Okay.
By the way, Ming, that's the question to all the editors.
Okay.
So when can we do that by? We don't know yet. But if as long as within December includes December 31st, it may be
right. So you're saying we would want to reference. I'm just
Yeah.
trying to
He's
clarify.
arguing
the
for
question.
number
Reference talk.
three and
I say
referencing it in
reference
the-
talk.
in the
Right. Yeah. Reference
Right.
talk. Don't need
Or,
reference.
or the question,
Up
a
to the list.
modification would be,
Hmm.
I don't know if you can just reference a attestation work being worked on rats, or I
As
don't know.
long as
I'm
the
just
document is an informational reference, you can reference anything you want. So
Yeah.
Right. So sadly I don't remember what the current state of the architecture document referring to the rats provided work in general. Like I know we're
So this-
deferring a
this
lot of
is-
stuff to
it
rats.
does
Right,
not
so-
mention rats at all right now.
Right.
That's why the issues are filed.
So
Yeah.
we only just agreed that we would use rats for the attestation. So this is a new concept, which is we're going through the architecture, doing the cleanup.
Right.
Yep.
So I mean, I think it's probably possible to say something like the Teep architecture will make use of the rats' work and will need to
That's what, yeah.
profile
Correct,
some of
Right.
their options, and that will be
And
done.
it will be specified in the future document.
But yeah, I don't think we need a specific
Yeah.
reference like
Okay.
in the.
You don't even need to
references
say
section.
future.
Sounds
We'll
great.
be referenced in a
Okay.
different, yeah.
That's the end of my rats issues, and so
Okay.
I think I'm going to hand it back to the chair now.
Yeah, so my question is, I see 3 issues left, and you have 8.5 minutes left. Do you think you can cover them in 8.5 minutes?
I don't remember what the 3 issues are, but I think so. 'cause
One
I-
was
yeah,
an
so-
editorial nit, the second one was APIs, and the third one was...
I don't know. It depends on whether people have questions.
Okay, so the question, I'll leave it to you, is whether you just want to cover them in a group, or we can do as many until we run out of time.
I'm okay going until the top of the hour, and then
Let's do that
cutting us
then.
off then and see where we're at.
Okay.
Okay. Issue number 11 was having a common way to coordinate between the transport spec and the protocol spec, such that the transport specs names for events that get passed between those two things has a common name. So when you click the two specs, this one signals the blah event, and the other one is when the blah event is signaled, something happens, that you have a common name for handoff between the two specs in this working group. And so we did that. There is this notion of conceptual APIs, so like a name for an event, if you will. And so right now the list is in the GitHub issue, pull request 74. So the GitHub issue number 11, the pull request 74, and in the transport spec, but not in the protocol spec, other than the OTRP spec had one of them, but not in the Teep protocol spec, right? That's a separate issue here. So here was 4 labels for events. Instead of process OTRP message, you can see it's process Teep message. That was recently changed. And so this is saying, here's a pull request that just explicitly lists these in its discussion about how brokers work, that says, here's a couple of events that kind of happen, and these are used to refer together between the Teep protocol spec and the Teep over HTTP spec uses these events as the interface between those. This is just abstract. Here's the name of the event. Something happens when a connection comes in, or when an error happens, and so on. So this is all the ones here I claim are roughly editorial, and so we're just going to do those unless there's objections.
Let the editorials go.
Yeah. This one, last IETF, we had a presentation at the very end from Soren. I don't know if Soren is here.
Yeah, he's
about
on
the use of IoT DDoS draft issues. So his presentation was about things like the Mirai botnet would infect IoT devices, and his question was, can Teep or the working group or whatever be used to help prevent those DDoS attacks? These DDoS attacks are really about getting malware onto the rich execution environment of the device, not the TE of the device, at least the ones that are discussed there. And so since we did not have time for that discussion last time, this would be the chance to discuss that. And maybe we do want to move this one to tomorrow.
Yeah, let's
Okay.
move that one to the...
All right.
Yeah.
The last one is editorial only. This is a list of things that I don't think we need to discuss unless somebody else says that we do. And so this is the last slide then. So I think maybe we just move the one issue over
I'll
there.
update the agenda. So tomorrow we'll start by the discussion of this last
Of
one.
the one issue, yeah. And
The one issue. And
as
then...
long as Soren can be there.
Oh, Soren, if you're on, can you dial in tomorrow morning as well, since it's your issue?
That one.
Soren,
Right,
are
it's
you...
his draft anyway. I think somebody
Yeah.
else saw the issues with.
Soren, are you there? Okay, well, we can start. If he's on, we'll kick it off. If not,
Okay.
we can defer. Okay, so with that, we will reconvene again tomorrow. And on the agenda, we will go through the Hannes left. the proposed. So I'll ask the question tomorrow. So Hannes will go through what we hope to be the but the new proposed Teep protocol. That'll be the focus for tomorrow, and a couple of announcements, as well as updates from the transport protocol by Dave. So with that, I let you guys go. I'll see you tomorrow. Thank you. Blue sheets. Where are the blue sheets, please? Make sure you sign them.